Shirley here with Jupiter Point of Thales, and I'm in a old new series which is Let's Talk Dirty About Countries. And I have Pluto in the ninth, and Pluto rules the dirt. Pluto rules where you look in the trash and you find gold there, where you kind of look at what is underneath. And ninth house is a good place to look at national charts of countries because or politics. Um, and this is Saturn day, Jupiter hour, with the ascendant enemy in heaven ruled by Jupiter. We have Jupiter in 11th degree of Gemini and the moon applying to square Neptune and the nodes. So we got some fated conversation. And I've been looking at Sweden because there is this saying that Sweden is paying its immigrants to get the fuck out of the country. Which might be a nice deal. Okay, you get to immigrate into Sweden, then you get to make some troubles, then you get $34,000 or euros. I don't know. I mean, don't try this at home. It's pretty cold in the winter. But oh, that's nice. Essential oils. But let's take a look at the chart of Sweden, and let's talk dirty about Sweden. So we got ascendant 21 degree Virgo with 18 degree Mars conjuncting. Now Mars is 18 degrees at the time of the transit and trining Saturn. Um, and we got Saturn Neptune conjunction in the 7th house for Sweden, which may have to do with those refugees because Saturn rules refugees and Neptune rules a couple of things. It rules spies. It rules drug lords. It rules homeless people that are to do with drugs. It rules the crime that is underneath. It also rules healers, channelers, psychiatrists, even to a degree psychologists, and even astrologers. Okay, so you think about construction of ships, that could be Neptune, Saturn. So because Saturn is a structure and Pisces is the ocean, and the Neptune is to travel to faraway land. So this Saturn-Neptune conjunction can also mean a note of communism. Okay, so the Saturn-Neptune associated with the USSR, with China, that now with the BRICS added the Uranus into the Neptune-Saturn and the Neptune-Pluto. Um, and so in the 7th house, it's house of partners and open enemies. 7th house Pisces immediately tells me that the borders are malleable. And indeed, Sweden is surrounded by ocean. That being said, Moon here is 24 degrees Pisces in the 7th. And the ruler of the 7th also is the ruler of the 4th, whole sign speaking, and it's in the 7th. Ruler of the 4th in the 7th. That means the people, the Swedes either live abroad, which they do, but it also means with the other thing around. Where would you find the people of Sweden? Well, in Ausland, okay, outside the borders. So the refugee thingy is important. Now I want to give you a little bit of an excerpt from an essay I made defining in the end of my first degree, and that has to do with the housing in Sweden. The €2 that I have to say about this was that they had a Malmo and they had a Stockholm, but Sweden is huge. And to develop infrastructure for ecosystemic rural villages where you could actually house people, that's absolutely, with over 100% tax, possible. Now, where did that system begin? After the Second World War, they needed miners, and they had you need the miners, and then they had to be attractive to employees, and they offered conditions that are social rights and everything. Just come over to Sweden, and you know it's a cold country, and you get a job, and you get good conditions, and you get this, and you get that. So they had to do welfare. This is the funding of the Swede welfare system. So you have to also look at it at a context. But then it became a 105% tax. and where it could have gone, and I want to emphasize that as something I emphasize with my essay, and that is you could build ecosystemic infrastructure in Sweden. It's a giant, okay, it's a giant country, and you could house all these people with the funding of taxation and reduce the taxation, okay? You could do that. But what they went for is to bombard Malmo and bombard Stockholm, bring in for the refugees that they need to bring and they could account for. But the thing is that they were waiting for the people to say, oh no, we don't want this communist type of social welfare, social funding. We don't want that. We want it to be liberalized, which would do nothing because you didn't add housing. You cannot build, if you do not build ecosystemically in the villages, in the rural places where you can still have the right to roam and you're not damaging anything. And you see all these YouTube channels going to Norwegian, going to Sweden, okay, building a cabin in the woods. You see that happening. So people are already doing that, quitting their golden cage of high-tech jobs in the city. But they didn't go for that. And what happens is like it's not a for or against the capitalism, but capitalism helps you none when you don't build more housing. And so that wouldn't change the black market. It would just uplift the margins because the prices would go up. Now, it is also true that without adding housing, communism itself or socialism would not help anybody because you have black market that is no different than what you would have in a capitalist market. Okay, it's the same name with a different name. So while we talk about the refugees, another thing Swedes are known for, and I'm half Dutch, is the people in Amsterdam are like, the Swedes own all the real estate. Okay? Now, that would be very fascinating because if what's going on with the real estate in Netherlands, that would mean that the owners of the estate are accountable for what happens in their estate. Okay? Let me say it again. The owners of the real estate, if that's your real estate, and there's some sex, espionage, trafficking, terror training factory going on there, okay, and you own the estate and you get dividends, you understand what that entails, and that's a war crime. So, I'm not saying that the Swedes own Amsterdam, but this is something that Sweden is known for, that Swedes actually live outside of Sweden. And for those that live inside of Sweden are not always Swedes. That began with the miners. They needed workforce and they had to be attractive to that workforce. Now Saturn also ruled the 5th and the 6th. The 6th is for the workforce. And 6th Aquarius does require for social welfare. It does require for social conditions. Wherever you have Aquarius, first of all, you might need social conditions, or you might gain from patents or intellectual property. Sixth house Aquarius means that the employees, they would need to be well treated, okay? And it doesn't mean luxury treated, it just means well treated. Okay? They would need that welfare. And indeed, to be attractive, Sweden had to go. Okay, we also have a Lilith here, might be talking about the more liberal attitude towards sex espionage. It is not sex workers. And it is indeed appropriate because Saturn conjunct in Neptune is, if it is sex work, it is sex espionage. Okay, this rules spies. I said, let's talk dirty about countries. I said what I said. Okay? So, but what's interesting, we have a Rahu in 11th degree Pisces, conjunct in that Saturn-Neptune. That means that we have a Ketu in the first house of Sweden. This is a country that was founded to be a part of something international. Now, what international? Something to do with health, something to do with liquid assets. So it can be WEF, it can be WHO. Not so much NAVO. NAVO has its, I think, Rahu in Aries. Okay, it's a military place, and Mars here would be with Ketu, so it's not so militant. I know Sweden has joined NATO, but this is giving more WEF and WHO here. That the identity of the country is Ketud. So Sweden going from being Sweden to being a part of a global organization. And this is a very risky business. It's kind of like deciding that you're marrying the bank, but you don't have a separate bank account in a separate bank. And if that is not enough, the eighth house, which would be the funding, the outsourcing, the funding that the country gets, well, it's ruled by Mars, that is with Ketu. It is a little bit, it's given codependent to a very toxic degree. Now, the moon in Pisces, 24 degrees Pisces, is releasing from an opposition to Mars. Okay, I was not the only one talking about this in my previous work, previous channels, but also Gracia Tasio, and I told her, okay, what happens when we talk about these things. Well, the moon is not always in a good position. Moon rules the people. And we find that all across the board that the moon is being deprived, unless we're talking about Belgium, which is a different case, but then they also replaced the population. Midheaven, 17 degrees Gemini, gives a duality. So that adds a little bit of the double player, double agent role. With Mercury in the Mercury 8 degrees Gemini, Mercury is very close to Aldebaran. It is in orb, okay? It's almost 9 degrees. It is in orb for Aldebaran. So let's talk about the birth chart. Is 1523. And this is the chart of Stockholm, which later became Sweden, okay? Note how the cities would later become the countries. This is so relevant for 2030. And it's so relevant when we consider declarations of independence. You want to think Gaza, okay? You want to think, if people talk about Taiwan and China that began to have negotiations, you want to think about the city. It is also in Amsterdam, it's also with Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. And we see it all across the board that before we had the country, we had the city. It's also historically, Demos Kratos, even when we talk about democracy, it was a city, it was a village. The people of the village are the rulers. That was democracy. And this is the foundation of cities as the foundation of countries. And now the way that the city will look is the way that the country will look. That's the chart. So the importance of having safety in the city, enough greenery in the city, enough plots of land, okay, not to have too crowded places, okay, for the people, the moon, to be well placed. The people, now, I would say kings need to know that. If you look at, I don't know if it was Mao, but there was a ruler in China that they made later to swipe the street. Now, there's nothing shameful about swiping the street. Okay, if I could get a job swiping the street and wouldn't ask for me to be some intelligence or something, and I would do that. But the thing is that, I said, let's talk dirty about countries. But the thing is, and I can't stand on my feet for too long, so it would be only like a few hours, even less. But the thing is that they made the king swipe the street. And so even if you're a tyrant, you want the moon and the fourth house to be well placed. By the way, in the chart of China, when I looked at it, they were understanding that. Also, when the chart of the world, the sun is not too well placed, there's something very interesting there. We need to look at it again. But here, moon opposing Mars, this is a day chart, it's not good. It's releasing from the opposition, which is not good. Okay? This constant tension that the people need to deal with, and even the state invading their houses. Okay, the housing, homes. Moon is also the housing, and here is the housing. There's something malleable. There's something maybe they have to deal with the flood, or maybe they have to deal with a flood of refugees. There's just something here where the boundaries are not well set. Although fourth house is Sag, and people want freedom. So perhaps this situation allows for a certain type of freedom, but it's the kind of freedom where, like, if I go back to Swede writers, if I read their literature, the Swede literature, it's the kind of notion where, I don't know if I have a book here. Let me see that. I think I do. Um, I don't know if he was a Swede. About the city, yes. So this is Shell Eskildsen. I think he was a Swede. And no, he talks about Norwegian. So yes, this is about Norwegian. That being said, this was also true to Sweden, where, like, if you hid money under, you know under the tiles, okay, you have the money under the floor. If you were stealing, you would have enough for the retirement age. If you did not steal, you wouldn't have enough. And so perhaps this freedom is the freedom to go for and evade the taxation, and evade the law, so that you would have enough. So that is also something. Now let's talk something good about Sweden, okay? Because I've been talking dirty, but it's not. It's a great country. So every country has its dirt. We have Venus here at its home sign. First of all, she is trining Pluto in wide orbit. She's trining Pluto, 8 degrees Taurus. This is a country that is rich with land and landscapes. Venus in Taurus at its home sign, okay? That would also mean a sweet women, a very beautiful women, okay? The trine to Pluto gives us a sense of empowerment without being overbearing. And that's a very beautiful thing. It's something that goes deep. Pluto here is in Capricorn in the 5th house. Um, but the Venus trine Pluto, for example, one thing that Finland has to fix about this chart is the Venus square Pluto. Venus trine Pluto gives us depth, and it gives us genuinely more authenticity. So that would also mean the diplomatic relations. This is 9th house Venus. Diplomatically, Sweden would have a lot of good politicians to offer. Um, According to the chart, I know nothing about the diplomacy of Sweden, but it could be very diplomatic, very authentic in its diplomacy. So it could offer good female politicians with a lot of good soft power. There is an inconjunct here between this Mars and this Venus, so we're talking more soft power. That being said, when it comes to understanding taxation, the implication of refugees on the land, debt, and so on and so forth, okay, the soft power here can play a gigantic role in keeping world peace. And that is something that is a very strong card for Sweden. So, and there is a lovely bisextile with this Pluto, Venus, and the Saturn, Neptune. And that gives a little bit of protection, that gives a little bit of safety, even within this refugee situation. Now, I said a little bit. There's also the square to the midheaven. There's also a giant Uranus square Jupiter here. There is also, okay, there's just a lot of things. Moon square Sun, which means there is a tension between the people and the rulers. But there is this remediation coming from Venus trining Pluto, and with the bisextile with Saturn, Neptune. It gives us ample power to authentic diplomacy. So this is a country that can do very well at times of peace. It is not benefic to have times of war for Sweden, but it is a country that would like to bridge over differences diplomatically. And Taurus does get to the essence of things. It's not the image to balance the image of something or to fiscally balance something, but there's a lot more authenticity here, essential authenticity. And I wonder how it expresses itself as world politics. Now let's talk about, let's talk a little bit about the NAVO here, because Sweden joining NAVO is giving Rahu to its 8th house. Um, and let's just put it that way. I'm not surprised that the cutting of the wireless cords, it's not wireless, that the cords of the at the ocean there, that the neurodivergent orcas move. I'm not surprised it happens around Sweden, because Mars is here with Ketu in the 1st house, and Rahu is going Pisces. So this is a country that would want to align things diplomatically. Let's say if you would do that to a very Martian country, you'd get a world war. But you do that to Sweden, they're like, NATO, please help. And NATO helps, okay? But I also want to mitigate that. They also want to diplomatically resolve that. Authentically, they will not, and here is important, soft power here has power. It's authenticity. Soft power, he's well informed. You want to think Switzerland. Okay, now Sweden is not Switzerland, but it has a power in espionage. It knows the dirt about everybody, but is not going to mistreat any country. And yet it knows the dirt about every country, so you wouldn't want to mess with that. And yet it's very amiable, so it wants to be fair to you anyway. So you don't have a reason to dislike Sweden. Okay, but if you're warmongering, it's going to be a bit of a problem. Now, Sweden has the money to pay its immigrants to leave the country. Where from? Hidden wealth is Leo, and the ruler is the 10th. But it also tells us something to do with jails and with hospitals. Sun is in Gemini in the 10th. It means that the ruling class, even the people in jail and in hospital, have wealth. Because the 8th house is ruled by a Mars that is with Ketu. So it's not so much from other sources, it's from within, but it's hidden wealth. And it's also ruling bedroom. Now, I'm not going to get into presupposition. Sweden is not doing anything that any other country is not doing. Okay, it's not doing anything that any other country is doing. So, but it does mean that there's some hidden wealth with the royal class, or the ruling class, or the elite that can afford paying these refugees to get the F out when they need to. That being said, they could also afford infrastructure in rural places, especially around the ocean, around the borders. But that would maybe place some sort of risk to Sweden. Okay, having it's a little bit of an island where it could also be used for exiles. So that's something to be cautious from. And yet, what the good things about Sweden, the absolutely good things about Sweden, is that bisextile here with Venus, Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto. That means that somehow there is a lot of support to the feminine, to the women, and And these women, what I'd say, they must protect the children because they have good dignity. And these women, they must use their soft power to protect the children. They are protected. And sometimes with Taurus, you might not even know the extent of your power, but with Pluto, you do. And it might come so naturally to you that you don't even think of what you can achieve. And I think women diplomats in Sweden, they can achieve a lot on a global scale, on an international scale, when it comes to releasing children from confiscation of the welfare. Jupiter also rules children, and it is in orb with the bisextile. So if women in Sweden did that, for using their soft power, they would begin an international trend. And I wouldn't be surprised if to find out Sweden began some international trends. Okay, we talk about public housing, we talk about welfare rights, we talk about everything that EU stands for, even as a lot of it is Sweden, with the good, the bad, and the evil, but a lot of it is good. And so if women use their soft power a little bit more, they can achieve with that what a lot of what world wars cannot. So very, very strong chart with that bisextile, albeit that Mars, ruler of the ascendant in the 10th. We have strong ruling class, and there's something Uranian. Okay, Uranus in a 0-degree Gemini. Sedna is now going over the Uranus of Sweden, and it is at that time where Sweden joined the NATO. Hint to NATO bosses, there's some money in there. Sweden can give a lot more money than it says that it can. Okay? Let's talk dirty about countries. We don't have to rely only on Germany here. But it can, if that would be the case, then Sweden can negotiate for a lot around children, and we would have to look of what that money to do with those children. Okay? And that is a global thing. It's not a local thing, even about royal families. So on the one hand, hey, Sweden has a lot more on the table that is under the table. And on the other hand, there's a lot of soft power, female politicians, women politicians, or even just sweet politicians, okay? Embracing the soft power, they can achieve some things that world wars cannot. And just to make sure that, up in the jails, up in the hospitals, up in the royal family's bedrooms, there are not issues with children that would need to be cleared and cleansed. Because once Uranus returns, this year Uranus is a Uranus return, okay? It's going to be some 7-8 years until it hits the sun, but it's going to, and it rules in the 12th, and it's in Gemini. Okay, and Mercury is on Aldebaran. That means that children themselves can be victorious in the peril to litigate for their freedom if needed be. Now, again, I have no idea what is going on. It can be that relatively the royal elite in Sweden is actually way more advanced than others. Okay, I don't know. So that being said, there's a lot of potential. If we talk about the global issue with welfare kidnapping children, Sweden can tend to that. If we talk about the global issues with refugees, Sweden doesn't have to cast out the refugees in as much as it can build ecosystemic villages in its own rural places, not necessarily around the sea because that would risk the national security, but also kind of, yes, around the sea because that would create a little bit of, not maybe everywhere, but kind of like, hey, you don't want to have your country like an island isolated that is a bit of an exile that's bad for everybody. And And Sweden has the power of technology. You're in a Gemini here. Okay, it squares Jupiter. Uranus doesn't receive, but it does receive a sextile from the moon. So we talk about building houses, floating houses that can actually have solar power, so that they don't get like the sailors that abandoned the ship. That can be done. That's exactly what should be done, a part of what should be done. So they can build, but also in those malleable marine borders that are malleable. There's a lot of technological solutions that can be applied other than, oh, let's bring up a lot of people, crowd them up until they start killing each other, and then say, well, do you want money to move the fuck out of here? So Sweden is playing to a global trend here that might help other nations. Somebody sneezed on that. Thank you. Truth, truth. There's a, the nationalization trend. And I guess I understand why. But if you want a nationalization, okay, get a Declaration of Independence with a good moon and a good ruler of the fourth. Then you get your sovereignty. Now, um, yes. So this episode of Talk Dirty About Countries, good things that can come to Sweden, to the world from Sweden in NAFO. Okay, Uranus moon is also our emotional safety. The soft power here with Venus, okay, is big on the authentically connecting, so to a sensuality, so being embodied, and the Uranus moon sextile here, which is radical acceptance. This together is giving, okay, antidote to a military operation that we know from the 50s as MK Ultra. Curation. Soldiers cannot be strong if they are tortured to loss of identity. That's soft power, okay? That's me doing Sweden's Venus. And if we do that from a childhood, okay, then we can't. It's very difficult when we later want to keep people accountable and have reliant people and rely on people. The children need to have a childhood. And also, if we want to avoid political assassination, the only time where, even as a tyrant or even as a ruler, you can withdraw and maybe swipe the streets, but you can still live and retire, okay, that only happens when there is a little more of a people regime after your reign. Okay, it doesn't happen in a tyranny where you lose the mandate of the heaven and people say, well, the king or the emperor got murdered. Well, they lost the mandate of the heaven. They were not good for the people. That's China, okay? But it's also everywhere around. Okay, you do not get to retire as a ruler unless it's more of a popular regime, not populistic, but the regime that has more sovereignty to the people. Now, if this sovereignty to the people is again a tyranny over segments of society, then you get something, okay, like Syria and Iraq, which is an impossible situation, where if the Syrian king, Bashar al-Assad, would not be oppressive, then he would be minority slaughtered. And then what happens after minority slaughtered? Then comes a bigger majority, and then it wants to conquer your land. Okay, this is what happens to tribes in America before the Americans came to America. Everybody knows that. Why do you have Choctaw, Choctaw? Everybody's like Choctaw and Cherokee. Everybody pulls out Choctaw and Cherokee. Okay, because all the other ones are dead. So, and I know this from the natives. Not from the natives, from the indigenous. Natives also, if you were born in America, the indigenous people, that they tell me that. We were cannibalizing on each other. I said, okay, I believe you. I say to you nothing that these people didn't say for out loud. Now, when it comes to the WHOEF, okay, here's a problem because there's an entanglement in those organizations for Sweden. And it's not too much wealth that is not dependent on the hidden wealth of the royal or ruling class. Now, the second house is Libra, which is also ruled by this international Venus. So the power here is the prowess, both the diplomatic prowess, but also the essential and the power of the land that Sweden has, and the soft power, the ability to preserve the land with Sweden's wisdom. That is the natural agricultural wisdom that is aware of the fact that if you disempower for the homeless or disempower for marginalized in society, but here's particularly the homeless or the poor, then basically you would have an invasion. This notion, this wisdom can be diplomatically transmitted. And there is this safety there with this prowess, which is these women, they have the power of their voice, but this voice has a lot to say, and this, and when that voice reminds you, it's like, yeah, you can kill all you want, but you would end up dead. This just the same. That just a fraction of a rationality is enough to understand what they're saying, and that is good enough and big enough. Um, Now that row on 11th degree can denote for example, Sweden going into legalizing assisted death, um, and I don't know what are the rules there, but that can be okay for because but it's also a degree of explosions and aviation explosions in the ocean or planes crashing into the ocean. Okay, stuff like that could happen. Let's just say for aviation, it's not the best. Air Force, it's not the best degree. Like I said, the military here is disempowered, and I don't know what were the ruling class thinking about Sweden when they made this chart, but the Martian powers were disempowered, and the Air Force also. And to be very honest, this includes ships because it's a Pisces degree, so ships could explode. And indeed, we had for the ocean underneath the cutting of the cords. Okay, happened around Sweden, so this was designed to be a jail. This was designed to be a place of exile where people cannot fight, cannot get out of. And it was designed to be a jail for rulers, for the elite. Like, I'd have to look at the history of Sweden after this episode, but I don't have much time. But yeah, this is the episode of Let's Talk Dirty about countries. But the best points, soft power, diplomacy, they can achieve a lot. And also, this is a country that, because it was designed to be jail, they understand that jails, hospitals, and places of isolation, we have to treat these people well, still, okay? We have to not lose dignity for human rights even in those situations. This is a country that, at least for the diplomacy, has to understand, has a lot to give internationally when it comes to that. So yeah,